He didn't knock. Ronan Vale walked into the Vineyard's harvest celebration like he owned it, because in his mind he always had. He crossed the grass in his pressed charcoal suit, past the string lights and the laughing strangers, until he found the child. 7 years old, dark hair, gray eyes that didn't belong to anyone in Napa Valley. Ronan crouched down to the boy's level, smiled the smile that had never once reached his eyes in 63 years of living. "You look just like someone I used to know," he said quietly. And then he reached out and lifted the silver necklace from around the boy's neck, just took it right off him, the clasp snapping, while the boy stood there too startled to speak. That was the moment Alara Voss understood that her 8 years of hiding were over. If you've ever built a life on a secret, you know what it costs you. Every morning, every school pickup, every time someone asks a simple question and you have to think 3 moves ahead before you answer. If that's you, if you've ever loved someone so much you buried the truth to protect them, then stay with me. Because this story is going to ask you something you might not be ready for. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and watch until the very end. Because this one goes places I promise you won't see coming. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all started. The morning of the Voss Vineyard Harvest Festival, Alara woke at 5:15 without an alarm. She lay still for a moment in the gray dark of her bedroom, listening to the silence of the property, the kind of silence that exists right before a place fills with people. In 4 hours, there would be 200 guests walking the rows, filling plastic cups with the grenache she'd spent 3 years coaxing out of drought-stressed soil. There would be music, a food truck from a family in Sonoma she'd known for 6 years, sticky-fingered children running between the vines. She loved the festival. She also dreaded it every single year for reasons she never said out loud to anyone. Too many strangers, too many cameras, too many people who might someday recognize a face. She got up before the thought could settle into something worse, pulled on her work jeans and flannel, and went to make coffee. Milo was already at the kitchen table. He was 7 years and 4 months old, which he would tell you precisely if you asked, and he was eating cereal with the focused attention of a person solving a problem. His dark hair was sticking up on one side. He had a small scratch on his chin from where he'd fallen off his bike 2 days ago and refused, loudly, to let Alara clean it properly. "You're up early," she said. "I set my alarm," he said without looking up. "I want to help with the tables. You want to eat samples before the guests get here." He considered this. Both. She laughed, actually laughed, which felt like something small and necessary, and poured her coffee and stood at the window while the light started coming up gold over the eastern ridge. This was the part she let herself feel good about. The light. The quiet. The boy at the table who said both with perfect honesty. She had not always been good at things. She wanted to be clear about that, even inside her own head. She had made decisions over the years that she could not fully defend. She had run when she should have stayed and stayed when she should have run, and there was one decision in particular, the biggest one, that she had never discussed with another living person. But she had built this. The vineyard wasn't hers outright. She managed it for the Aldridge Family Trust, who had hired her 8 years ago with nothing but a viticulture certification and a forwarding address. She had turned a struggling mid-tier operation into one that wine writers actually mentioned in the same paragraph as the valley's better names. She had done that through getting up at 5:15, through learning the specific language of soil and weather and patience, through not sleeping well for 8 years and never complaining about it to anyone. She had made herself useful. She had made herself necessary. She had built walls out of ordinary life and called it safety. She almost believed it. By 10 in the morning, the festival was fully alive, and Alara was everywhere at once, redirecting the food truck 3 feet to the left, talking down a catering volunteer who'd arrived without the right tablecloths, approving the last-minute addition of a photo station near the barrel room entrance. She was good at this, moving through controlled chaos, keeping her voice level, solving problems before they became visible to the people who were paying to have a good afternoon. Milo orbited her for the first hour, then got absorbed into a group of kids near the far end of the property where someone had set up a cornhole game. She could see him from most of the main lawn. That was the rule she kept without announcing it. Always be able to see him. It was just past noon when she noticed the vehicle. A black SUV, long and heavy, had turned off the access road and was moving slowly up the private drive. Not the kind of car that belonged to a harvest festival. The kind of car that belonged to a particular category of men she had spent 8 years learning not to think about. She told herself it was nothing, a lost driver, a vendor who'd gotten the wrong address. She told herself this while her heart rate was already climbing. The SUV parked at the edge of the lot, in the space closest to the main entrance, the way a person parks when they want to leave quickly, if they need to. 2 men got out first. She recognized what they were by the way they moved. The systematic scan of the grounds, the positioning relative to the vehicle's rear door. Then the rear door opened. Alara had a glass of wine in her hand. She set it down on the nearest table before she dropped it. Cassian Vale had gotten older. Of course he had. It had been 8 years. 8 years was a long time. People didn't stay the same. But the change in him was not just age. It was something that had been added on top of the person she remembered, like a coat he couldn't take off anymore. He was broader, stiller. He moved through the crowded lawn with a quality of silence around him that made people step aside without quite knowing why they were doing it. She had not seen him since she was 24 years old. She had not spoken his name out loud to anyone in longer than that. She stood absolutely still and watched him scan the festival, and she thought, with the precise, cold clarity of someone who has rehearsed a disaster many times, he doesn't know about Milo. He can't know. Nobody knows. And then she watched his eyes stop moving. She followed his gaze across the lawn to the far end of the property, where Milo was crouching over something in the grass with that particular intensity he got when he found an insect or a strange rock. Cassian had gone completely still. She moved. Not toward Cassian, toward Milo, cutting a diagonal across the lawn, smiling at guests as she passed them, keeping her walk at a pace that would not look like running. She was good at not looking like what she was actually doing. She had been practicing that skill for 8 years. She was 20 feet away from Milo when she saw the man in the charcoal suit. He had come from a different angle, from near the barrel room, moving with the particular ease of someone who knew exactly where he was going and had decided in advance that no one would stop him. She didn't recognize him at first. He was older than she remembered, his hair gone fully gray. And then she did. Ronan Vale, Cassian's uncle. The man who ran the organization's finances, its lawyers, its political contacts. The man who had, in her limited experience of that world, always been the one standing slightly behind Cassian and slightly to the left, watching everything. He crouched down in front of Milo with a smile that would look warm to anyone who didn't know how to read him. "You look just like someone I used to know," he said. Milo, to his credit, looked at the stranger with the measured suspicion of a child who had been raised to be polite but not trusting. "Okay," he said. Ronan reached out and lifted the necklace from around Milo's neck. The clasp was old. She'd been meaning to have it fixed, and it gave without resistance, just like that, gone. "Hey," Milo said. He wasn't scared yet. He was 7 and hadn't learned what it meant when someone took something from you in a particular way. "That's mine." "It was once," Ronan said pleasantly. He stood, and the necklace disappeared into his pocket. "Now I'm just returning it to its original owner." Alara arrived. She put her hand on Milo's shoulder from behind and felt him relax slightly at her touch. She looked at Ronan, and she did not let her face do anything. "Can I help you?" she said. Her voice was even. She had no idea how. Ronan looked at her with the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for this conversation. "Alara Voss," he said, "you've done well for yourself. This is a lovely property." "It's not mine. You should leave." "I'm sure we'll have time to talk." He glanced past her toward the main lawn, where Cassian would still be standing. "I wanted to come and say hello first, before my nephew sees him." He nodded toward Milo, still pleasantly, and walked away. Alara stood there for 3 seconds, which was all she allowed herself. Then she crouched down to Milo's level, keeping her body between him and the direction Ronan had gone. "Hey, look at me." Milo looked at her. His eyes were gray, the particular pale gray that she had spent 8 years not letting herself examine too closely. "That man took my necklace," he said. "I know, I'm going to get it back. I need you to do something for me." "What?" "I need you to go find Carmen, the Vineyard's assistant manager, who Milo liked because she let him help with spreadsheets. And I need you to stay with her inside the office until I come get you, okay? Don't come out, even if the festival is still going." Milo read her face with the accuracy of a child who had learned, through years of small moments, how to tell when his mother was actually worried versus when she was performing calm. He could always tell the difference. "Is something bad happening?" he asked. "Nothing that I can't handle," she said, which was not the same as no. He went. He was a good kid, not perfect. He had a temper about small things and was unreasonably stubborn about vegetables. But he trusted her, and that trust was the thing she had worked hardest to deserve. She stood up and turned around. Cassian was 10 feet away. Well, up close, the changes in him were worse and better than she expected. Worse because she could see what the years had done to him specifically. The tension that lived around his jaw, the way his eyes moved over her face with a practiced blankness that hadn't been there when he was 26. Better because underneath all of it, underneath the suit and the silence and the two men standing at a respectful distance behind him, he looked the same way he had the last night she'd seen him, like someone who had been running for a long time and was very, very tired. "Alara," he said. "Don't," she said. A pause. "Don't what?" "Don't say my name like that, like we're old friends." "We're not old friends." His voice was quieter than she remembered. The roughness in it was new. "How long have you been here?" 8 years? I didn't know." "I know you didn't." She crossed her arms, a thing she almost never did because it looked defensive, and she'd spent years learning not to look defensive. She did it anyway. "What are you doing here, Cassian?" He looked at her for a moment without answering. Then, "Ronan told me there was someone I needed to see." The cold arrived in her stomach like a stone dropping into water. "Ronan brought you here. He said he'd found someone connected to a deal from 8 years ago. He didn't tell me more than that." Something shifted in his expression. "The boy, he's yours." Not a question. "He's mine," she said. Just that. She held the sentence there on her own, waiting to see what he'd put next to it. Cassian looked at her face for a long time. He had always been good at reading people. Too good sometimes, in her experience. The thing she had always found frightening, and also, when she was younger and less wise, compelling about him was that he almost never had to ask twice. He didn't ask twice now either. "Alara." His voice had changed. Something in it had broken open. "Don't," she said again, but it came out differently this time, less hard. "How old is he?" She said nothing. "How old?" 7, she said. 7 years and 4 months. Cassian Vale, who had not, according to everything she had ever heard about him in the years since, shown a visible emotion in the presence of other people since approximately the age of 30, looked away from her and put his hand over his mouth. She watched him stand there among the string lights and the wine glasses and the sound of people having a perfectly normal afternoon, and she felt the thing she had not let herself feel in 8 years, which was the complicated, unwelcome, entirely inconvenient fact that she had never once stopped loving him. She also felt the thing she had felt every day for those same 8 years, which was fear. "You need to leave," she said. "Take your uncle and your—" She glanced at the two men behind him. "Whoever they are, and you need to leave this property and not come back. Because whatever Ronan told you, whatever reason he gave you for bringing you here today, it wasn't for your benefit, it wasn't for mine, and it certainly wasn't for Milo's." Cassian lowered his hand. "You think he set this up?" "I don't think. I know." She kept her voice low, careful, aware of the guests 15 feet away refilling their wine glasses. "Your uncle has been watching me for 8 years, Cassian. I just didn't know it until 20 minutes ago. And the fact that he brought you here himself, in person, right now? That's not a coincidence. That's a move." He was listening. She had always liked that about him. He listened the way most people didn't, like the words actually mattered. "What is he trying to do?" Cassian said. "I don't know yet. But whatever it is—" She stopped. Started again. "Milo doesn't know anything about you. He doesn't know your name. He thinks his father was someone I knew briefly who is not in our lives. I made a choice 8 years ago, and I need you to understand that I made it to protect him, not to hurt you, not because you should have told me." The 3 words landed flat and final, and she let them sit there because she owed him that. "Yes," she said. "I should have. And I didn't because I was 24 and I was scared and I thought you'd chosen. She said it carefully. I thought you'd chosen the organization over everything else, over me. And I wasn't going to raise a child inside that. I was forced out, he said, quiet, hard. I didn't choose anything. She looked at him. I know that now. How long have you known? She didn't answer that. She looked past his shoulder toward the barrel room where she hoped Carmen had enough sense to keep Milo occupied with the inventory spreadsheet and not let him near any windows. Cash in, she said. I need you to think right now, not feel, think. Your uncle is somewhere on this property and he has that necklace and he knows what Milo looks like. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for him? She watched it happen, watched him shift from whatever he'd been in those first raw seconds into something else. Something that had kept him alive for a very long time in a world that killed most of the people who entered it. It means, he said slowly, that someone else already knows. She nodded. And Ronan made sure I was here when they found out. She nodded again. His jaw tightened. He wanted me to see the boy before the information got out, so I'd have a reason to fight for him. And so he could control how you reacted, she said. He knew you'd be… She paused. He knew this would be a shock. He wanted to be the one who managed it. Cassian looked at her with something in his face that was not quite anger and not quite grief. You're very smart, he said, which under other circumstances might have sounded like a compliment, and right now sounded more like something he'd forgotten and just remembered. I've had 8 years to get smarter, she said. Behind him, one of the two men had moved 3 steps closer and was speaking quietly into a phone. She watched him. His posture changed while he was on the call. Cash in, she said. He'd already seen it. He turned and crossed to the man in 3 quick strides. She watched them exchange words too low to hear. Cassian turned back to her. We have a problem, he said, more specific. There are 2 vehicles that followed us from the city. They've been in the parking area for the last 40 minutes. His voice was completely level. They're not mine. The harvest festival was still happening around them. Somewhere, a child was laughing. The string lights were swaying in the afternoon breeze. Milo, she said. Go, Cassian said. Get him and go inside. Stay in the center of the building, away from windows. I'll handle… This is my property, she said. My guests. Elara, if you're going to do something that puts 200 people in danger, I'm not going to do anything here. The word here was deliberate. I'm going to get my people in position, and I'm going to find my uncle, and then we are going to have a very direct conversation, and then you and Milo are going to come with me. We're not going anywhere with you. You don't have a choice right now. He said it without cruelty, which was almost worse. The people in those vehicles already know the boy exists. That means this property is not safe. I can argue with you about the next 6 months when we're not surrounded. She stood there, in the vineyard she had built her life inside of, and felt the walls come down. She thought about Milo at the kitchen table that morning. Both, he had said, with perfect honesty. She thought about what it cost to build a life on a secret and how the debt always came due. Fine, she said. But when this is over, he said, you can say whatever you want to me. I'll listen to all of it. She believed him. That was the problem with Cassian Vale. She had always believed him, even when she'd had every reason not to. She walked toward the barrel room and she did not look back, and she told herself that was a choice she was making and not the beginning of something she had no control over. She was probably wrong about that, but she walked anyway. Inside the barrel room, Carmen looked up from the desk where she'd been sitting with Milo, pretending to show him something on a spreadsheet. She read Alara's face in 1 second flat, the way people who have worked closely with someone for 4 years learn to do. What do you need? Carmen said. Keys to the truck. The back way out. And I need you to start moving guests toward the main building, casually, like there's another tasting inside. Don't use the word emergency. Carmen nodded. No questions. That was worth more than Alara could say. She looked at Milo. He had the necklace thought written all over his face. She could see it. The 7-year-old's inventory of wrongs that needed to be addressed. But he looked at her and read something that made him set it aside. Are we leaving? He asked. For a little while, she said. Grab your jacket. He grabbed his jacket. He didn't ask where they were going or why, because somewhere in his 7 years and 4 months, he had developed the instinct, the same one she'd spent 8 years cultivating, That sometimes you ask questions and sometimes you just move. She wished he hadn't had to learn that. She wished it fiercely, standing there in the barrel room while the sound of the festival drifted through the walls. But wishing was a thing you did when you had time. She took his hand and they moved. The truck was a '09 Tacoma that Alara kept for hauling equipment, and it smelled like fertilizer and old coffee, and the specific combination of Milo's soccer cleats and whatever snack he'd smuggled into the back seat last Tuesday. She drove it out the service road behind the barrel room while the festival was still running, and she did not turn on the headlights until she hit the county road, even though it was 2 in the afternoon and bright enough that she didn't need them. Old habit. The kind you don't notice until you're doing it. Milo sat in the passenger seat with his seatbelt on, and his jacket zipped and said nothing for 3 full minutes, which was unusual for him. Then he said, "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe." "Our house is safe." "Our house is safe most of the time," she said. "Right now I need somewhere different." He looked out the window. The Vineyard rows were passing fast on either side, gold and green and orderly, the product of 8 years of daily attention. She watched them go in the peripheral vision she wasn't using for the rearview mirror. Nothing on the road behind her. Not yet. "That man took my necklace," Milo said. "I know." "Are you going to get it back?" She thought about Ronan Vale's hand closing around the clasp, the way he'd smiled. "Yes," she said, which was the answer she owed her son, and possibly a lie. Her phone rang through the truck's speakers before she could think more about it. Unknown number, which meant Cassian had gotten her contact information from somewhere in the last 20 minutes, which meant he had people who could find things quickly, which she already knew and had spent 8 years not thinking about. She answered it. "Where are you?" No preamble. His voice was compressed, doing the thing it did when he was managing something large and keeping the management invisible. "County Road 12, heading toward the Aldridge secondary property. It's a storage facility. Nobody uses it this time of year. I have the key. Don't go there." "Why?" A half-second pause. "Because Ronan knows your work history better than you think he does. If he's been watching you for 8 years, he knows every property connected to your employer." She kept driving, but her hands tightened on the wheel. "Then where?" "There's a motel on Route 29, the Fairfield. Not a chain. Pay in cash if you have it." "I have it." She always had cash. Another old habit she'd thought was paranoia. "Get a room on the ground floor, backside. I'll be there in 40 minutes. "I didn't agree to meet you." "No," he said. "You didn't." And waited. She exhaled. Milo was watching her with the careful attention of a child who understood tone better than words. She looked at him for 1 second and looked back at the road. 40 minutes, she said, and ended the call. The Fairfield Motel was the kind of place that had been built in the early 80s and maintained just enough to stay technically functional. The room smelled like industrial cleaner, and the carpet was a brown that had probably been burgundy 20 years ago, and there was a painting of a lake bolted to the wall that Milo examined with genuine interest for 30 seconds before declaring it kind of sad. "It is kind of sad," Alara agreed. She'd paid cash at the front desk, given a name that wasn't hers, and the man behind the counter had taken it without looking up from his phone. She'd chosen the room at the end of the back row, ground floor, corner, the way Cassian had said, but also the way she would have chosen without being told. She sat on the edge of the bed and let herself think. 8 years. She had built 8 years of ordinary life on one foundational decision, and the decision had been this, that Cassian's world would kill her son if it knew about him, and so it would not know. She had not told her parents, who had died not knowing. She had not told Carmen, who was her closest friend in the valley. She had not told the pediatrician, or the school, or anyone who had ever asked Milo the casual adult question of "Where's your dad?" a question Milo had answered his whole life with a shrug that she'd taught him, gently, to deploy. She had made that choice for good reasons. She still believed the reasons. What she was less certain about, sitting in a motel room that smelled like cleaner, was whether the reasons made the choice right. "Mom," Milo said. He was sitting cross-legged on the other bed, having tested the mattress with 3 experimental bounces and found it acceptable. "Who was that man?" "The one who took my necklace." "Which one?" she said, before she could stop herself. Milo's eyes sharpened. He had caught the slip, she could see it. He was too quick sometimes for his own good. For her good. "There were 2? "There were some people I used to know," she said carefully. "A long time ago, before you were born, before I came to the valley. Bad people? She considered lying. She was good at it. Not dishonest by nature, but she had learned the skill the way you learned anything you needed to survive. But Milo was looking at her with a directness that made small lies feel like large ones. Complicated people, she said. Some of them bad. Some of them more complicated than that. He thought about this. The man who's coming here, he said. Is he one of the complicated ones? The knock at the door came before she answered. Well, Cassian came in alone, which surprised her. She'd expected at least one of the suited men from the Vineyard. Instead, it was just him, his jacket gone, his sleeves pushed up, looking like someone who had been making fast decisions for the last hour and had arrived at the end of his available options. He stopped when he saw Milo. Milo, to his credit, did not hide. He sat on the bed and looked at the stranger with the same measured attention he'd given the lake painting, evaluating. Cassian's face did something complicated. She watched him work to control it and mostly succeed. Hey, he said to Milo. His voice was lower than it had been on the phone. Hi, Milo said. Then, with the directness that had been making Alara's life both easier and harder for 7 years. Are you one of the complicated ones? Cassian looked at Alara. She gave him nothing. Yeah, he said. I am. He moved to the small table by the window and sat in the chair. Not on the beds, nothing that would crowd the boy's space. Something careful in the choice. What's your name? Milo. I'm Cassian. Milo tried the name in his head visibly. Do you know my mom from before? Yeah, a long time ago. She said some of the people from before were bad. Some of them are. He glanced at Alara briefly, then back to Milo. She was smart to get away from them. Milo seemed to find this acceptable. He unzipped his jacket partway, thought about it, zipped it back up. Do you know where my necklace went? Cassian's jaw tightened. Just barely, but she caught it. I'm going to get it back. My mom said that too. Then you'll definitely get it back, Cassian said. And the certainty in it, not a promise, more like a statement of practical fact, made Milo nod with a seriousness that hurt her somewhere behind her sternum. She stood up. Milo, there's a vending machine at the end of the hall. Here. She handed him a $5 bill. Stay where I can see you through the window, okay? Don't go past the ice machine. He took the money, assessed the implied freedom, and decided it was worth the temporary exile. The door closed behind him. She turned on Cassian before the latch caught. Talk, she said. What happened at the Vineyard? All of it. He ran a hand over his jaw. Ronan's gone. He left before I could reach him. He had a car I didn't know about, which means he planned the exit in advance. Of course he did. The 2 vehicles in the lot, they were Del Vecchio people. She went still. Sal Del Vecchio. His son, Marco. Sal died 3 years ago. Cassian said it without emotion, which meant he was holding the emotion somewhere she couldn't see it. Marco took over and he's been looking for leverage against me for 2 years. If he knows Milo exists, how would Marco Del Vecchio know about Milo? He didn't exist in that world when I left. Ronan, Cassian said simply. The word sat there. She let it. You're saying your uncle told your enemies about your son. She said it flat, so he could hear how it sounded. I'm saying Ronan has been running a long game that I didn't see because I didn't know what I was looking for. His voice was controlled, but something behind it was not. He brought me there so I'd find out about Milo at the same moment the Del Vecchios did. So I'd be reactive, emotional, so he could manage what I did next. Why would he want you emotional? He's always wanted you colder. Cassian looked at her. Something in his eyes shifted. That's the right question. Then answer it. I don't know yet. He said it like it cost him something, which it probably did. She'd never known him to say I don't know easily. But Ronan doesn't do anything without a reason. Whatever he's building, we're inside it now. She crossed her arms. The old defensive posture. She let herself have it this time. What does that mean practically? For us, tonight. It means you can't go back to the Vineyard. Cassian, not permanently, just until I understand what Ronan is positioning for. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Is there somewhere you could take him? Someone who doesn't connect back to the valley, doesn't know your work history, doesn't know me. She thought. My college roommate. She's in Portland now. We've stayed in touch, but she never knew anything about my life before. I've never mentioned your name to her. Does Milo have a go bag? The fact that she knew exactly what that phrase meant and had one ready told her something about herself that she preferred not to examine. Yes. When can you leave? I'm not leaving without knowing what's happening here. Alara. He's 7. He thinks we're on a day trip. She kept her voice low and hard. I am not putting him in a car for 6 hours without understanding what I'm running from and whether running is even the right answer. So talk to me like I'm someone whose opinion matters, because right now I'm the one who has kept him safe for 8 years while you didn't know he existed. That earns me something. A silence. Long enough to mean he was actually considering it rather than just pausing. Fair, he said. She blinked. She hadn't expected that. I need to find Ronan before the Delvecchios use whatever information he gave them. If I can get to him in the next 12 hours, I can control the narrative. I can make it known that Milo is not accessible, that anyone who moves toward him moves toward me. And if you can't get to Ronan in 12 hours, then the Delvecchios will try to use Milo as leverage. They won't move openly. Marco is cautious. He builds pressure rather than acting directly. We have time, not unlimited time. How much? 48 hours. Maybe 72. She looked at the window. Through the glass, she could see Milo at the vending machine, frowning at the options with the concentration he gave everything. He had both hands on the machine, pressing his nose closer to read the labels. When did you find out? She asked, not looking away from him. Find out what? That Ronan engineered your disappearance 8 years ago. She turned to look at Cassian. When did you know? The quality of his silence changed. 6 months ago, he said. She hadn't expected that either. 6 months. One of his people, a man who'd worked for him since before I was born. He came to me dying, liver, nothing dramatic, and he wanted to clean his conscience. Cassian said it without bitterness, which cost him more than bitterness would have. He told me Ronan had intercepted communications, staged evidence of a betrayal that never happened, made me believe you'd... He stopped. Made me believe you'd been the one who walked away. And you believed him. I was 26 and I'd just watched my father die and I was being handed an organization I didn't want. Yes, I believed him. A pause. I was wrong. She had waited years to hear that. She'd imagined on bad nights what it would feel like. The answer was that it felt like nothing she'd imagined. It felt like being very tired. 6 months ago, she said, and you came here today. Ronan called me first. I didn't come on my own. I didn't know where you were. I didn't... He stopped again. She watched him choose words more carefully than she'd ever seen him choose anything. I was still deciding what I owed you, what I could offer. If there was anything I didn't know about the boy. Would it have changed what you offered? Yes, he said immediately. Then, no, I would have come regardless, I think. I was trying to figure out how. That's not a very clean answer. No, he agreed. It's not. The door opened and Milo came back with a bag of chips and a bottle of water and the air of someone who had been forced to make hard choices under pressure. He looked at the two of them with the assessment of a child who knew when the adult conversation had been important. Did you figure it out? He asked. Working on it, Ilara said. Milo opened his chips and sat on the bed, and this was somehow the most domestic moment she'd been in for 8 years, which was insane given the circumstances. And she hated that she noticed it. Cassian's phone rang at 6:47. He stepped outside to take it, and she watched through the window. His back was to her. The call lasted 4 minutes. When he came back in, he had the look of someone who had received information that changed the geometry of everything. What? She said. Marco Del Vecchio made a move. He looked at Milo, then at her. The look said not in front of him. She crossed to Milo and said she needed 2 minutes, handed him her phone with a game on it, and stepped into the bathroom with Cassian. The bathroom was small. They stood 3 feet apart, which in that space felt like less. What did he do? She said. He didn't go after Milo. He went after the Vineyard. Cassian's voice was quiet and flat. 2 men, 40 minutes ago. They put the Aldridge Records office and the management files on Carmen's desk. Photographed everything. She felt it in her chest. The specific dread of watching something you built get touched by hands that have no business touching it. Carmen? She's fine. She wasn't there. She'd moved the guests inside like you asked and then stepped out when it was clear. He paused. But here's what Marco was looking for. My guy confirmed it. They copied personnel files, financial documents, and something in your personal employment folder. There's nothing in that folder. Elara, I'm telling you there's nothing. She stopped. She stopped because she remembered. 7 years ago, in the first year after Milo was born, when she'd still been terrified in a specific and constant way that every decision she'd made was wrong, she had done one thing that she had never told anyone. She had accessed financial records from the Old Vale organization. Not stolen them, not exactly, but she had printed documents and photographs and kept them, the way you kept an insurance policy you hoped you'd never need. Records of transactions, names and accounts connected to Ronan Vale's financial structure in the organization. She'd kept them inside the Aldridge employment files because no one ever looked there. There was something in that folder, she said. Cassian looked at her. Records, she said. From the organization, from 8 years ago, from Ronan's financial network. The silence in the bathroom was a specific kind of silence. You had them, he said, slowly. For 80 years. Insurance. Against what? Against exactly this. Against the day someone found us and I needed something to trade. She met his eyes. I was 24 years old and pregnant, and I didn't have any money or any allies, and I knew your world well enough to know that being powerless was worse than being in danger, so I made myself useful. By holding evidence against my uncle. By having something nobody else had. She didn't flinch from it. Yes. He wasn't angry. She'd expected anger. She'd half prepared for it on some level. But what was on his face was something more complicated. Something that looked like respect and grief mixed together into an expression that didn't have a clean name. Marco has it now, he said. He has copies. I don't have the originals here. I have them somewhere else. Somewhere he can't access. Where? I'll tell you when I know what you're going to do with the information. A beat. 2. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. You still don't trust me. I trust you to try to do the right thing, she said. I'm not sure I trust your judgment about what the right thing is. Those are different. That's fair too, he said, and there was something in his voice that she couldn't quite interpret. Tiredness, and something else. Something that had been there 8 years ago when he was 26 and had not, apparently, entirely gone away. She looked at the space between them. 3 feet, less, in this room. Cassian, she said it quietly. Whatever Ronan is doing, whatever he set up today, it put Milo in the middle of a war between you and the Delvecchios, which means I need to know right now whether you're going to protect him or whether you're going to use him. Use him. His voice went very flat. He's my son. Yes. And you've known that for 3 hours. I've known it for 7 years. So you'll understand why I'm asking. He held her gaze for a long time. I'm not going to use him, he said. I'm not going to let anyone use him. That is the only thing I am completely certain about right now. She nodded. Not because she believed him the way she'd believed him at 24, when she'd believed everything. Because she believed him the way you believed a person after you'd watched them hear the worst possible information and respond to it the way he had. Not with calculation, not with what it means for me, but with that half second where he'd covered his mouth and looked away. You couldn't fake that. She'd seen enough people try. Okay, she said. Then here's what I need you to understand. If we do this, whatever we do next, it doesn't go back to what it was. I'm not folding Milo into the organization. I'm not moving him into a house with security details and teaching him to count exits. I's a 7-year-old who has a life and a school and a best friend named Owen who comes over on Fridays, and that does not change. I know. I'm not finished. If you want to know your son, if you want to be someone he knows, you have to show up differently. Not as what you are right now, as something else. I'm working on something else, he said. How hard? A pause. Harder since tonight, he said. It wasn't a complete answer. She noted the gap. But she also noted that it wasn't nothing. And in this bathroom in a Route 29 motel, not nothing was what she had to work with. She opened the bathroom door. Milo had gotten bored with the phone and was lying on his back on the bed looking at the ceiling. He turned his head when they came out. Are you done? He said. Getting there, Elara said. Milo sat up. He was looking at Cassian with the calculating look that meant he was assembling information, and then he said the thing she had been dreading since Cassian walked through the door. "You look like me." The room went very quiet. Cassian sat down in the chair again, slowly, with the careful movement of someone who was trying not to startle something fragile. "Yeah," he said. "I've been told that." Milo tilted his head. "How?" Cassian looked at Alara. She felt the question. How much? How much does he get? How much is too much for tonight? She gave him nothing because she genuinely didn't know the answer, and she was tired of knowing every answer alone. "Your mom and I knew each other," Cassian said. "A long time ago." She said that before. "The reason we look similar is—" He stopped. "It's complicated." "People keep saying," Milo said, with a 7-year-old's precise and legitimate grievance. "I know," Cassian said. "And I know that's not a good enough answer, but tonight it has to be, because we have some things we need to figure out first. When we figure them out, you'll get a real answer, I promise." Milo regarded him, looked at Alara, looked back at Cassian. "Okay," he said finally, "but I want my necklace back." "You'll get it back," Cassian said. "You said that already. And I meant it both times." Milo considered this, then lay back down on the bed. "Okay," he said again, to the ceiling. "I'm going to sleep. This day was a lot." Alara sat on the edge of the other bed and felt something in her chest do something she couldn't categorize. Not relief, not grief, some third thing that didn't have a word. She watched her son close his eyes with the complete practical efficiency of a child who had decided sleep was the correct response to overwhelming information, and she thought, "I built that. In 8 years, with no help, I built a person who responds to chaos with rest." She had not given herself credit for that before. She was choosing to give herself credit for it now, because it might be the last quiet moment she had for a while. Cassian's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his whole body changed. Not much. He was practiced, but she caught it. "What?" she said. He turned the phone so she could see. It was a photograph. The vineyard at dusk. Her vineyard. The main property. The rose she knew better than her own face. And in the foreground, leaning against the fence post at the entrance gate, was Ronan Vale, smiling at the camera. The text beneath the photograph was 3 words, "Your move, nephew." Below it, a second message, this one to a different contact list, which Cassian's man had intercepted and forwarded. She read it twice. It was addressed to Marco Del Vecchio. It said, "The boy's location will be provided at midnight. Non-negotiable terms attached." She read it a third time to make sure she understood what it meant. Ronan wasn't running. Ronan had never been running. He had come to the vineyard today not to expose Milo to Cassian, but to expose Milo's location to the Del Vecchios, using Cassian as the delivery mechanism. He had known Cassian would find the motel. He had probably known which motel. He had given them until midnight, not as a threat, but as a countdown. And when that countdown ended, every advantage they had built in the last 6 hours would collapse. Cassian was already dialing. She watched him step to the far wall, his voice dropping to the controlled murmur he used when he was giving instructions that could not be misunderstood. She looked at Milo, already asleep on the bed with his jacket still zipped. 48 hours, Cassian had said. Maybe 72. He'd been wrong. They had until midnight. Cassian made 4 calls in 11 minutes, and she listened to all of them. Not to be nosy. She was past nosy. They were past every ordinary social boundary that might have applied in a different situation, but because the calls told her things she needed to know, and because she had learned, in a very specific education that she had never asked for, that the way a person speaks when they believe no one important is listening is the truest version of them. He was precise. No raised voice, no threats, no language that would mean anything to someone who didn't already know the context. He said things like the secondary location and the documentation situation and the uncle problem in the flat, compressed tone of someone managing a machine that had started running badly and needed immediate recalibration. The men on the other end responded in shorthand that she could only partially decode. But she caught enough. 3 of his people were already on the move toward Napa. 2 more were pulling surveillance on Ronan's last known position, which was the Vineyard Gate, where the photo had been taken, and which Ronan had likely already vacated. One person, a woman named Solis, whose last name never came up, was running down the Del Vecchio communication chain, trying to identify the specific individual Marco had tasked with the midnight delivery. When he finished the fourth call, he stood with his back to the room for a moment, hand against the wall, head down. She let him have the moment, 30 seconds of it. Then, "We can't stay here past 10. He turned around. "I know. Where are your people taking us?" "There's a property in Calistoga. It's not mine. It's registered to a corporation 3 layers removed. Ronan shouldn't be able to trace it in the time he has." He moved to the table, sat, ran both hands over his face. The gesture was unguarded in a way the phone calls hadn't been. "Solis is going to meet us there. She's the only one I completely trust right now." "Why her specifically?" "She came to me 18 months ago with information about Ronan. Small things, discrepancies in financial routing. I didn't act on it because I didn't have enough." He looked at Alara with the expression of a man cataloging his own errors. "I should have acted on it." "A lot of things you should have done earlier," she said, without cruelty. "Just fact." "Yes," he said, just fact back. Milo was still asleep, which felt like a gift and also like borrowed time. She moved to the window and looked out at the parking lot. The Tacoma, 3 other vehicles, a light at the far end of the building that kept flickering. Nothing wrong. Nothing yet. "Tell me about Solis," she said. "She's been in the organization 11 years. Financial oversight, same division as Ronan, but below him. She's the one who started noticing the routing discrepancies." He paused. "She also knew my father, before he died." "Did she know about me?" He was quiet for a second. "She knew there had been someone. She didn't know your name." "Does she know now?" "I got her from the Vineyard parking lot," he said. 3 hours ago. Yes, she knows now." Alara turned from the window. "And you trust her with that information?" "More than anyone else I have right now." He met her eyes. "Which I understand is not the same as an unconditional endorsement." "It's not," she agreed. "But it'll do?" She crossed to the bed and put her hand on Milo's shoulder, gentle, just enough to start bringing him back. He made a sound against the pillow and didn't move. She did it again, firmer. "Hey, Milo, we need to go." "We just got here," he said into the pillow. "I know, I'm sorry, come on." He sat up with his eyes still mostly closed and the look on his face of someone managing a profound personal injustice. And she handed him his jacket, which he put on wrong side out and didn't notice. And she didn't correct him because it didn't matter, and because she was watching the parking lot over his shoulder. The drive to Calistoga took 38 minutes and nobody talked much. Milo fell back asleep within 10 minutes, head against the window, breath fogging the glass in small rhythmic clouds. Alara drove. Cassian sat in the passenger seat and watched the road in the mirrors with the specific alert stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that vigilance was not optional. Once, at a red light on a stretch of empty road, he said, "Tell me about him." She knew what he meant. "What do you want to know?" "Anything." She thought about where to start with a person, how you compress 7 years into the space between a red light and a green one. "He's stubborn," she said, "about small things specifically. Socks, vegetables, which way the toilet paper faces. But with big things, he adapts fast. He's been the new kid twice. We moved once when he was 4. And both times he figured out the social structure within a week and found his place. Smart. Scary smart sometimes. He reads 3 grade levels ahead." She paused. "He's also terrible at losing. Board games, races, anything competitive. He doesn't cry, he gets very quiet, and then he processes for about 20 minutes, and then he's fine. But those 20 minutes are real." Cassian said nothing. She could feel him listening. "He has one friend he tells everything to," she said. "Owen. They've been inseparable since 2nd grade. He has other friends, but Owen is the real one." She glanced in the rear view at the sleeping boy. "He asks about his father approximately once every 4 months. Not more, not less. Always the same question. Was he a good person? I always say yes." A silence. "Was that wrong?" she said. "No," Cassian said. He said it looking out the passenger window at the dark hills passing. "No, that wasn't wrong." The light had been green for a while. She drove. The Calistoga property was a low ranch-style house set back from a private road, surrounded by mature oaks that swallowed the ambient light from neighboring properties. No vineyard, no decorative landscaping. The kind of house that said we are not interesting, which was the whole point. A woman was waiting on the front step when they pulled in. Solis was 50-something, compact, with close-cropped gray hair and the eyes of someone who had spent years reading financial documents and had learned to apply that same precise attention to people. She watched Alara get out of the truck with the look of someone taking a very specific kind of inventory. "You're Alara Voss," she said. "Yes." "Marisol Solis." She didn't offer her hand. She was watching the back seat where Milo was being extracted, still half asleep, by his own determination not to be carried. He looks exactly like Cassian did at that age. "People keep saying that," Alara said, which was true, and also the thing Milo himself had now said back to her twice. "It's worth saying," Solis said, without warmth or coldness. "Pure observation. It also means anyone who knew Cassian young and sees the boy is going to reach the same conclusion Ronan did. That's a problem that doesn't go away with geography." "I know." "Do you?" Not a question. Also not hostile, just Solis establishing what kind of conversation they were going to have. "Come inside." The house had been stocked recently. Food in the refrigerator, clean towels, a bedroom in the back with a twin bed that Milo assessed and accepted without commentary. He was asleep for real within 4 minutes of horizontal. Alara stood in the doorway watching him for longer than was strictly necessary, then went back to the main room. Solis had spread documents on the kitchen table. Physical documents, printed, which told Alara something about Solis's operational preferences, and also about how seriously she was taking the security situation. Cassian was already reading. Alara sat down and Solis put a cup of coffee in front of her, which she drank without tasting it, and looked at what was on the table. The documents were financial records, but not the same ones she'd kept in her employment folder. These were more recent, within the last 3 years, and they were more detailed than anything she'd seen in her own collection. Account structures, shell corporation hierarchies, transfer routing through 4 different jurisdictions. "Where did you get these?" Alara said. "I've been building this for 14 months, Solis said. She sat across from them, her own coffee untouched. "What you had in your file, I know about that," Cassian told me when he called. "That's the historical foundation. What I have is the current structure. Ronan's been rebuilding since 2021. New accounts, new routing, new partner relationships." She tapped one page. "Including Marco Del Vecchio." Cassian looked up. "When?" "The active partnership started 22 months ago." The number settled into the room. "Before Ronan came to you with this," Alara said to Cassian. 8 months before, Solis confirmed. "Ronan was already working with Del Vecchio when he arranged today." Which means today was not an improvised response to something. Today was the final stage of a plan that has been running for nearly 2 years. Cassian set down the page he was holding. He set it down very carefully, the way you handle something when your hands want to do something else. "He brought me there," Cassian said, "to see Milo." "Yes." "And Del Vecchio was already in position." "Yes." "So the purpose was not to surprise me with information about my son." He was working it out loud, which she recognized as his process, saying the structure of a thing so he could hear it. "The purpose was to make the information about my son the final piece of the trap." "The trap being?" Alara said. Solis looked at her steadily. "You." A beat. "Specifically," Solis said, "the documents you've been holding. Ronan has known about them for approximately 6 years. He had a man inside the Aldridge record system, not regularly, just occasional access checks. He knew what you had, and he knew where it was." She paused. "He let you keep it." Alara felt the floor shift under her, figuratively and specifically. "He let me keep it." "Because the documents in your folder are the historical record. They document the old structure, the original network that Ronan built with Cassian's father. If those documents became public, they would damage Ronan, but they would also damage Cassian. They implicate the entire Veil organization, including the current legitimate operations." Solis's voice was level throughout, the voice of someone delivering a structural analysis who understands the structure includes the people in the room. "Ronan has been letting you hold a weapon that would hurt his enemy and his enemy's son equally. He kept it in place as an insurance policy against you. If you ever moved against him, He could trigger a situation where the document surfaced in a way that destroyed Cassian too. Alara looked at Cassian. He was looking at the table. "But that's not what tonight is," she said to Solis. "No, tonight is different." Solis pulled out another page. "Marco Del Vecchio has been building a federal case. Quietly, through intermediaries, but two of his people flipped to a U.S. attorney's office 18 months ago. The case targets Cassian, not Ronan, because Cassian is the one running the active organization. Ronan's role is structured to look advisory. Ronan is going to use my documents," Alara said. "He's going to give them to Del Vecchio, who is going to give them to the federal case." "The documents you had would provide historical predicate for a RICO charge," Solis said. "Combined with the Del Vecchio informant's testimony, yes, it would be significant." "So tonight," Cassian said, still looking at the table, still very quiet. "Ronan isn't trying to pressure me, he's trying to finish me." "Yes," Solis said. "Using my son's existence as the distraction. Get me reactive, get me moving, while the real move happens with the documents." "The documents were already photographed," Alara said. She said it to Cassian. "Marco's people had them by 6 o'clock." "Yes," Solis said. "We have maybe until the morning before they're in the hands of the attorney's office." The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere in the house, a clock was ticking, which was the kind of detail that didn't matter and that she was aware of anyway. "There's something else," Solis said. Alara looked at her. The woman's face had not changed throughout this conversation, had not softened, had not expressed anything that could be read as sympathy or its absence. But something in the cadence of those 3 words was different. "Tell me," Cassian said. Solis reached to the bottom of the stack and produced a single page. She set it on the table facing Cassian. He read it. Alara watched his face. She had seen Cassian manage bad information 3 times in the last 8 hours. Each time, the management had been visible as management. She could see him choosing his response, containing his reaction. This time was different. This time, she watched something happen to his face that was not managed and not chosen. It moved through him the way a current moves through water. The surface changed, but the change came from somewhere underneath. He pushed the paper across the table to her without speaking. She read it. It was a communication record, intercepted, according to the notation at the top, between Ronan Vale and a name she didn't recognize. Dated 14 months ago. The substance of the message was short, functional, and precise. It referred to a payment. The payment was connected to an event 9 years ago. The event was described as the removal of DV. She read it twice. Then she understood what DV were the initials of, and the room felt different after that. "Dominic Vale," she said. Cassian's father. "His death was ruled a heart attack," Solis said. "Natural causes. He had a cardiac history." "But it wasn't." "No," Solis said. "It wasn't." She looked at Cassian. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table, palms down, not moving. The stillness was total. The kind of stillness that was not the absence of something but the presence of something so large it had nowhere to go. "Cassian," she said. "I know," he said. "Just that." "When did Solis find this?" 3 days ago, Solis said. "I was going to bring it to him this week. Tonight moved the timeline." Alara looked at the page, then at Cassian. The grief on his face was specific and private, and she felt the trespass of seeing it, but she didn't look away, because the alternative was pretending it wasn't there, and she was done pretending things that were in the room weren't in the room. "He killed your father," she said, "and then he ran the organization in your name." "He's been running it since before my father died," Cassian said. His voice was strange, flat but very present, like the voice of someone who is underwater but can still hear everything. "I was the face. I was always the face. Dominic was the face before me." He stopped. "We were always the face." "The legitimate inheritance structure gives him cover," Solis said. "The Vale name, the Vale relationships, the organizational loyalty that goes with a named succession. Without Cassian in the seat, Ronan is just a financial manager. With Cassian in the seat, he's untouchable," Alara said. "Correct." Cassian's hands pressed flat on the table. She watched the tendons in them. "He's been using me for 9 years," he said, "since before my father's body was cold." "Yes. The organization I've been running, the decisions I've made, were made within a structure he designed, Solis said. That doesn't absolve you of the decisions. But yes, the bluntness of it, the complete refusal to soften the delivery, made Alara look at Solis differently. She understood then why Cassian trusted her. Not because she was kind, but because she was exact. Cassian stood up from the table, walked to the window, stood there looking at the dark outside. There's more, Solis said to his back. Alara closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. Tell us. The midnight deadline Ronan gave in his message to Marco. It's not just about document delivery. Solis turned another page. It's about Milo specifically. There's a secondary communication sent 2 hours ago from a number connected to Ronan's people, to a contact at Marco's organization. It discusses the boy directly. Alara's hand found the edge of the table. What does it say about him? She said, flat and precise as she could make it. That he exists, that his existence gives Cassian a vulnerability, and that the Del Vecchio organization has an opportunity to make use of that vulnerability before Cassian stabilizes his position. Solis looked at Alara without apology or softness. Marco is being offered Milo as a bargaining chip, not to harm him, to take him. Briefly. Long enough to force Cassian to the table with terms that destroy his legal standing. They want to take my child, Alara said. That is what the communication describes. The sound that came from somewhere in her chest was not a word. It bypassed language entirely. She was on her feet before she processed the decision to stand, and her hands were on the table, and she was looking at Solis with a clarity that she recognized as the specific kind of clarity that arrived when fear burned off everything else and left only function. How? She said. How do they know where we are? Solis's expression shifted. Barely. But enough. They don't, Cassian said from the window. Not yet. Not yet, Solis confirmed. The midnight deadline is for document delivery. The communication about Milo is preparatory. They're building the option, not executing it. But by morning, when the documents are processed, they'll have reason to execute it, Alara said. Yes. Cassian turned from the window. He was not the same as he'd been 30 minutes ago, but the difference was not the one she'd expected. She'd expected collapse, or cold fury, or the specific dangerous blankness she'd seen in his face at the Vineyard when the SUV first arrived. Instead, he looked like a man who had finished a very long argument with himself and arrived at the end of it. I'm going to find Ronan tonight, he said. Cassian, not to hurt him. He looked at Alara and the steadiness in his eyes was new. I'm going to get the necklace back, and I'm going to give him the opportunity to stop this, one time. And if he doesn't, she said, then he doesn't. He looked at Solis. I need everything you have on where he goes when he wants to disappear. Old patterns, properties that predate the organization, anything that's not in the current system. I have some, Solis said. Not everything. Start with what you have. Solis began pulling pages. Alara stayed standing, looking at the table, at the document with the initials DV and the word removal and the payment amount. She thought about Milo asleep in the back room, jacket still wrong side out, breathing the specific breathing of a child who had decided the day was finished. She thought about what the morning looked like if Cassian didn't find Ronan tonight. She thought about her document copies, the originals she'd told Cassian were somewhere else, and how much longer she could hold that card, and whether holding it was still the right strategy. The originals, she said. My copies. Where I've been keeping them. Cassian looked at her. A safe deposit box in Healdsburg, under a name that doesn't connect to me, my college roommate's name, with her old address. I paid for 3 years at a time in cash. She held his gaze. I'm telling you this because it's the only copy that isn't in Marco Del Vecchio's hands right now. If we're going to do anything tonight that requires those records to serve a purpose, you need to know they exist. Can we access them tonight? The branch opens at 9. Then it has to wait until morning, Solis said, which means we have tonight to find Ronan and morning to make a move before the attorney's office receives the photographed copies. She said it like a timeline, because it was a timeline, and timelines were what she dealt in. Cassian nodded. He was already moving toward the door, his jacket in his hand, the particular forward lean of a man who has converted grief into velocity. Stay here, he said to Alara. Don't open the door for anyone Solis doesn't confirm first. I know how this works, she said. I know you do. He stopped with his hand on the doorframe, looked back at her. The thing you said earlier, about who I need to become. She waited. I heard it, he said. I'm hearing it right now. He held her eyes for one more second, and then he was gone, and the door closed, and the house was quiet again except for the clock she couldn't stop noticing. Solis gathered the documents into a precise stack and looked at Alara with the expression of someone who has seen many situations and has learned not to invest emotionally in outcomes. He'll find him, she said. Not comfort, assessment. I know he will, Alara said. That's not what I'm afraid of. What are you afraid of? She looked toward the hallway where the room with the twin bed was, where Milo was asleep in his inside-out jacket, where 7 years of ordinary life was waiting to either survive the night or not. I'm afraid of what finding Ronan does to him, she said. Whether he comes back from it the same or different. Solis was quiet for a moment. Then, he hasn't been the same since your name came up 6 months ago. Whatever he comes back as tonight, it won't be worse than what the last 6 months have been. It was the most human thing the woman had said since they'd arrived, and it arrived without warning, and Alara sat back down at the table and put her hands around the cold coffee cup and held on to it and did not cry. Because crying was a thing you did when you had time, and she was beginning to understand that time was the one resource none of them had enough of. At 11:43, 17 minutes before the midnight deadline, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photograph of the Healdsburg bank branch. The caption read, "We found the other copies too." Alara stared at the photograph for 4 seconds. Then she was moving. Solis. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and turned the phone screen toward the woman. They have the bank. Solis looked at the image. Her expression did not change, but something behind it went very still, the way water goes still, right before something moves underneath it. She took the phone, studied the photograph, then set it on the table with the precise placement of someone controlling her hands. When was that taken? She said. The branch closes at 5. That photo was taken after dark. Look at the street lighting. Alara's voice was steady in the way that voices go steady when the body has decided that falling apart is not an option right now. They've been ahead of us the whole time, not because they're smarter, because Ronan gave them everything. He gave them the name on the account. He had to. That's the only way they find it. It's not in my name. It's not connected to any address I've used. The only way you find it is if someone tells you what name to look for. She sat down, then stood back up, because sitting felt wrong. My college roommate, Dana Marsh, that's the name on the box. Does Dana Marsh know? No, she has no idea that name was used. I never told her. She was pacing now, 3 steps to the window and 3 steps back. Which means when they go to that bank in the morning, they're going to walk in with Dana Marsh's information and walk out with the only copies that Marco Del Vecchio doesn't already have. Unless we get there first. The branch opens at 9. It's 11:47, Solis said. I know what time it is. Solis pulled her own phone. I'm going to call Cassian. Don't. Alara stopped pacing. He's in the middle of finding Ronan. If you pull him out of that now, we lose both. We don't get to the bank and we don't get Ronan. Let him finish. Solis looked at her for a moment with the particular assessment she'd been applying to Alara since they arrived, the one that felt like being read rather than looked at. And what do? We hold position until we hear from him. Alara sat down this time and stayed sitting. And we figure out what we have that they don't. What do we have that they don't? Us knowing that they found the bank. They sent that message to rattle me, to make me move and make a mistake. They don't know that I know their play. She put both hands flat on the table, the same way Cassian had done 2 hours ago, and for one disorienting second she felt the echo of it. If we stay still, they don't know we're still. Solis considered this. Then, with the efficiency of someone who makes decisions by excluding bad options rather than selecting good ones, she sat down and began organizing the documents on the table into a different order. Tell me everything you remember about what was in that safe deposit box, she said. Exact contents, dates on documents if you know them. Alara told her. It took 9 minutes. Solis wrote in a small, precise hand on a yellow legal pad, asking clarifying questions without looking up. And by the end, they had a document inventory that was either going to matter or wasn't, depending on what happened between now and 9 in the morning. When they were done, the house was quiet enough that she could hear Milo breathing through the partially open bedroom door. He sounds like Cassian when he sleeps, Solis said, without looking up from her notes. Same rhythm, slightly uneven on the exhale. Alara looked at her. You've heard Cassian sleep. When he was small, I knew his mother. A pause. She died when he was 9. After that, I was around occasionally, not often enough. She said the last part without emphasis, which made it land heavier than emphasis would have. They sat in the kitchen and waited, and the clock kept ticking, and at 12:22, Cassian called. He'd found Ronan at the third property on Solis's list, a stone-built house off a private road north of St. Helena, registered in the name of a deceased business associate of Ronan's father, layers deep and very old. The kind of hiding place you build over decades because you always plan to need it. He described the location in 30 seconds, then said, "He's here. He was expecting me." Alara heard something in his voice that she parsed before she could name it. "Are you hurt?" "No." A beat. "Not significantly." What does not significantly mean? It means 2 of his people met me at the gate, and it took a few minutes to clarify the situation. His voice was compressed again, the management voice, but underneath it something was running hot. "I'm inside now. Solis, I need you to listen." He gave Solis a string of account numbers he had apparently taken from a document inside the house. She wrote them down without asking how he'd gotten access to a document inside a house where 2 men had just tried to stop him from entering. The account numbers went on to a separate page. Then he said, "Alara, I need you to hear something." She took the phone from Solis. "I'm here." Ronan has a copy of Milo's birth certificate, the original, not a scan, which means he had someone inside the county records system. She closed her eyes. "He's been holding it for 4 years, Cassian said. "The father line is blank on the document. You filed it that way. But the point is he had it. He's been sitting on it like every other piece of information, building the set. What is he doing with it now? He brought it here, which means he intended to use it tonight or he wanted me to see it." A short pause. "I've seen it." "Cassian, I'm fine. The word fine doing none of its usual work. I need you and Solis to move in the next 30 minutes. There's a car in the attached garage. Keys are in the second kitchen drawer. Drive to the Healdsburg branch, park on the street, and wait for me. I'll be there by 2. The bank doesn't open until 9. I know, but I don't want you at the Calistoga house any longer than necessary. If they're tracking movement, which they are, the house is going to come up eventually." Another pause that had weight in it. "And I need you where I can reach you." She heard what was in that last sentence, not control, something more exposed than control. "What are you doing with Ronan?" she said. "Talking," he said, "just talking." She didn't entirely believe that, but she also knew that pushing on it right now served no one. "Milo. Bring him. Keep him in the car when you get there. It's going to be cold. There's a blanket in the trunk." "I know how to take care of my son," she said, which came out sharper than she'd intended. "I know you do." Quiet. No defensiveness. "I'll be there by 2. He ended the call. Solis was already on her feet, the legal pad under her arm, reaching for her coat. "I'll get the car." "Give me 2 minutes," Alara said, and went to wake Milo for the 3rd time. Milo woke up this time fully and immediately, which told her his sleep had been lighter than it looked. He sat up in the dark room and looked at her without asking where they were, which meant he had remembered between sleep and waking and had started from that remembered position rather than from confusion. "We're moving again," she said. "Okay." He swung his legs over the side of the bed. She noticed he'd taken his jacket off this time. It was across the foot of the bed, wrong side out, and put it back on right while she watched. A small self-correction, private, which she pretended not to notice. "Are you scared?" she asked. She didn't usually ask this. She'd spent years not asking it, because asking it created the emotion rather than addressing it. But something about tonight felt different. Milo thought about it. Actually thought, in that way he had. "Kind of," he said. "But not the bad kind of scared. The kind where something is happening and you want to know how it ends." She looked at him, 7 years old. "Yeah," she said, "that's kind of where I am too." He nodded like this was useful information and picked up his shoes. The drive from Calistoga to Healdsburg was 40 minutes in the dark. Solis driving, Alara in the passenger seat. Milo wrapped in the trunk blanket in the back with his eyes open and his mouth closed. The road was nearly empty at this hour, which should have been reassuring and wasn't, because empty roads meant that any vehicle behind them would be visible, and any vehicle behind them would be significant. Solis checked the mirrors the same way Alara did, with the same interval, which told Alara they had built their survival instincts from the same materials, even if they'd built them in different rooms. "He's going to walk away," Solis said. "Not a question." "From the organization?" "Yes."
Alara watched the dark road. "When did you decide that?" "I didn't decide. I observed." Solis's eyes stayed forward. The way he spoke about the boy on the phone, the way he spoke about you. Men who are going to stay in what he's in don't talk that way about the people they want to protect. They build walls between the people and the work. A pause. "Cassian stopped building walls tonight. That could get him killed." "Yes," Solis said. "It could." From the back seat, quietly, "Is Cassian coming back?" Alara turned. Milo was looking at her from inside the blanket with the specific steady look he got when he wanted a real answer. "Yes," she said. "You said that like you meant it." "I did mean it." A pause. "Okay," he said, and closed his eyes.
They parked on the street half a block from the bank branch at 1:48 in the morning. The street was empty, the bank dark, the signage turned off. Solis parked facing the direction they'd come from, which was the right choice, and turned off the engine, and they sat. At 2:11, headlights appeared at the far end of the street. The car that pulled up behind them was not the car Cassian had left St. Helena in. It was a different vehicle, older, domestic, the kind that didn't get remembered, and it sat for 30 seconds before the door opened. Cassian crossed to the passenger window, and she lowered it. He looked like the last 4 hours, which is to say, he looked like a man who had been in a building with people who didn't want him there and had resolved the situation through means that were not primarily verbal. His lip was cut, top left, small but new. There was something on his right hand she chose not to look at for long. His suit jacket was gone entirely, and his shirt was untucked on one side. But his eyes were clear. "How's Ronan?" she said. "Alive." He said it like a decision he'd made deliberately and was standing by. "And no longer in a position to make calls tonight." "Where is he?" "Somewhere he'll stay until morning. My people have him." He glanced in the back seat. Milo was asleep again, genuinely this time, the boneless sleep of total exhaustion. Something moved across Cassian's face when he looked at him. He turned back to Alara. "The account numbers I gave Solis, can you run them?" Solis from the driver's seat. "Already started. I have 2 contacts who owe me in ways that don't expire." "Good. The documents in that house, Ronan's copies, I have them." He reached into his shirt and produced a folded envelope. "This is everything he had on us. Physical copies, including," he paused, "including the birth certificate." He held it out. She took it. It was heavier than paper should be. "There were also 2 phones," he said. "I have those. Solis's contacts are going to need to extract the communications before the service provider detects the account access." "I've already messaged them," Solis said. "What did Ronan tell you?" Alara said. "When you talked." Cassian was quiet for a moment, the way he was quiet when he was editing, choosing which pieces of a conversation to hand over. "He told me the organization was never mine, that my father built something and then made the mistake of trying to leave it, and that Ronan fixed that mistake. He said it flat, the way you say things when you've finished processing them, and what's left is just the fact of them. He told me I was useful to him in the same way a name on a letterhead is useful, present but not actually running anything." "Do you believe him?" "About some of it." He exhaled. "The decisions I made, there were real decisions. I wasn't nothing, but the framework those decisions happened inside, the structure, the alliances, the reason the organization exists the way it does, that was Ronan. It was always Ronan. And Marco Del Vecchio. Ronan gave me the specifics on that partnership, not willingly." A pause. "But specifically." She decided not to ask how specifically. "Does Marco know Ronan is contained?" "Not yet. He will by dawn, which means we have a window." He looked at Solis. "How fast can your contacts move on those account numbers?" "By 6, if they're willing to work now." "Tell them I'll make it worth their time." "I already did." He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before it went away. The Healdsburg branch, he said. You need to be inside when it opens, not after. When? First customer. He reached into the car and put his hand briefly on her arm, which was the first time he'd touched her since the Vineyard, and it lasted 2 seconds, and she felt both of those seconds clearly. What's in that box is the only thing we have that Marco doesn't control. If we can get it before his people arrive, and if his people are already there, then we deal with that. His jaw tightened. But I don't think they move before 9. The message last night was to rattle you. They don't have enough information to access the box without you or without Dana Marsh. And bringing Dana Marsh into this is a step that makes noise. Marco is cautious. You keep saying that, cautious. He is. It's not a comfort. It's a tactical fact. Cautious men build pressure rather than applying it directly. It means we have time if we move correctly. He straightened up. Try to get 2 hours sleep. I'll be outside. Where are you going? He looked at the street. Nowhere. He said it like a man who had finally reached the end of somewhere and was learning what the alternative felt like. I'll be right here. She watched him cross to the older car and get in, and the windows were dark after that, but she could see the shape of him in the driver's seat, the set of his shoulders, the slight forward lean that was his permanent posture. She sat back. The envelope with the documents was in her lap. Solis said from the driver's seat, without preamble, You should sleep. I know. 2 hours is better than nothing. I know that too. Elara. Solis said her name the way people say names when they want the name itself to carry the weight of everything else they're not saying. He came back from that house in one piece. That's not nothing. She looked at the envelope, then at the dark bank windows down the block, then at the back seat where Milo was making the slightly uneven exhale that Solis had noted and that she had heard for 7 years, and that she now had a different relationship to than she'd had 12 hours ago. No, she said. It's not nothing. She closed her eyes, opened them again almost immediately, closed them again, and this time let them stay. At 6:47, Solis's phone made a sound, and the sound woke Elara from something that had been close enough to sleep to count. Solis read the screen, then read it again, which was unusual for her. What? Elara said. The account numbers Cassian pulled from Ronan's house. Solis turned the phone so Elara could read the message from her contact. 2 of them are flagged in a federal monitoring database. They were flagged 14 months ago. Elara read the message. Read it again. Marco's federal case, she said. Yes, but look at the date the accounts were flagged. Solis pointed. 14 months ago, which is the same date Ronan established the active partnership with Del Vecchio. The implication assembled itself in the early morning light. Ronan flagged his own accounts, Elara said. Not himself, but through Marco. Yes. He built the federal case against Cassian deliberately. He gave Marco's people the information they needed to open an investigation. She looked at Solis. He's been trying to remove Cassian legally, not just politically, permanently. If the federal case completes, Cassian is prosecuted. The organization falls. Ronan restructures under a new name with Marco's cooperation, takes the assets, and is untouchable because he cooperated with the prosecution. Solis's voice was the same throughout, level, clinical, precise. But her hands on the phone were not entirely steady. He's been building this for over a year. We've been inside a structure we couldn't see. Cassian needs to know now. Elara was already reaching for her phone. Wait. Solis put a hand on her arm. There's a second part. Elara stopped. The federal monitoring flag. It came with a name. The attorney's office contact that Marco has been feeding information to. She turned the phone all the way around. That name is someone we know. Elara read the name on the screen. She read it twice. The way you read something when you want to be wrong. She was not wrong. The name was Marisol Solis. The file photo beside it was from 18 months ago. The description beneath it said, Confidential Informant, Active Status, Vale Organization Financial Division. The kitchen of the Calistoga house had been quiet. This car was quieter. Elara looked up from the phone and found Solis looking at her, and whatever she'd expected to see on the woman's face, guilt, calculation, the rapid assembly of a cover story, was not there. What was there was something she couldn't name on first look. Explain, Elara said. One word, flat and cold and final. I became an informant 22 months ago, Solis said. The same month Ronan and Marco established their partnership. Not because they turned me, because I went to them. She said it without decoration. I had just found the first evidence that Ronan had killed Dominic Vale. I needed a structure that could hold him accountable. The Vale organization couldn't do it from inside, so I went outside. You've been feeding the federal case. I've been feeding the federal case against Ronan, not against Cassian. Her voice was entirely steady. Every piece of information I provided was specifically structured to point at Ronan's financial operations. The accounts I gave them are Ronan's accounts. The transactions I documented are Ronan's transactions. But the case is against Cassian. The case Marco built is against Cassian. What I gave them is not. The attorney's office has both. They have Marco's material, which implicates Cassian, and they have my material, which implicates Ronan. They've been treating them as one investigation. Her jaw was set, which is not what I intended, and which I've been trying to correct for 6 months. Elara sat in the cold car in the early morning with the phone in her hand and looked at the woman who had given them coffee and printed documents and accounted numbers and the small, strange human observation about the boy's breathing pattern. Cassian trusted you, she said. Yes. And you were informing on his organization. On Ronan's operation within his organization. A pause. It's not a clean distinction. I know that. He is going to... She stopped. She was going to say he is going to feel betrayed, but the word betrayed did not cover the last 20 years of Cassian Vale's life, so she stopped. You need to tell him. Yes. Now, not later. He gets out of that car and the first thing that happens is you tell him. She handed the phone back. Because the only play we have left requires him to trust someone, and it needs to be based on the truth, not what's left of it. Solis took the phone. Her hands were steadier than they had any right to be. I know, she said. Elara got out of the car into the cold Healdsburg morning, the air sharp with the smell of last night's fog burning off, and crossed to the older vehicle where Cassian was sitting with his eyes open and the look of someone who had not slept and had not tried to. She knocked once on the glass. He lowered the window. You need to get out, she said. He read her face. Got out. Something happened. Yes. She looked at him in the early light, at the cut lip and the careful hands and the eyes that were clear even after everything. And I need you to hear it from Solis directly, not from me. He turned toward the car, back to her. How bad? She thought about the photograph of the bank at night. She thought about the birth certificate in the envelope in her coat pocket. She thought about the name on a federal monitoring database and the words confidential informant and 22 months. It changes the plan, she said, but we still have a plan. That matters. He looked at her for a moment, and she saw him make the decision she was asking him to make, to absorb an unknown quantity of bad information and remain functional enough to use it. She had watched him do that 3 times in the last 12 hours. She was watching it again. Okay, he said. They crossed to Solis's car together, Cassian and Elara, in the early morning light with the bank half a block away, and Milo asleep in the back seat, and 9 hours of wreckage behind them, and Solis got out to meet them on the sidewalk, and the expression on her face when she looked at Cassian was the one Elara hadn't been able to name earlier. She could name it now. It was the face of someone who had been carrying something for a very long time, and had arrived at the place where they were going to put it down, and didn't yet know what their arms would feel like without the weight. Cassian, Solis said, I need to tell you something. 40 feet down the block, the bank's interior lights came on. Cassian listened to all of it. That was the thing Elara noticed most. He didn't interrupt, didn't pace, didn't do any of the things she would have expected from a man receiving the information that the person he trusted most had been feeding his organization's financial records to a federal investigation for 22 months. He stood on the Healdsburg sidewalk in the early morning cold with his hands at his sides and his face doing very little, and he listened to Solis speak with the complete terrible attention of someone who has learned that interrupting doesn't change what's coming. When Solis finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough for a delivery truck to pass the end of the block and turn the corner and disappear. The material you gave them, Cassian said. All of it points at Ronan. Yes. But it's been filed under the same investigation as Marco's material. Yes. The attorney's office combined the sources without fully distinguishing the targets. It's an investigative failure. They should have built separate files, but it's the file that exists. Can it be separated? Solis's breath made a small cloud in the cold air. That's what I've been trying to do for 6 months. With limited success, because the attorney handling the case is motivated to use everything available against the biggest target, which they've determined is you. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. Not with anger. She had been prepared for anger. Alara could see it in the set of her shoulders. But with something that was harder to absorb than anger. You should have told me, he said. Yes. 6 months ago, when you first started trying to separate the files, when you came to me with the routing discrepancies. His voice was very even. You came to me with just enough to keep me engaged and not enough to understand the full situation. I was trying to protect the investigation against Ronan, Solis said. If you'd known there was a federal element, I would have made different decisions, he said, about what I disclosed, about what I destroyed, about tonight. A pause. You managed me. The word landed. Solis held it. Yes, she said. I managed you. And it was wrong. Even with the reasons being what they are, it was wrong. Cassian looked at the sidewalk, then at the bank windows where the interior lights were now fully on, then at Alara, who gave him nothing because it wasn't hers to give. This was between him and Solis, and the only thing she could offer was to stay present while it happened. I'm not going to tell you it was the same as what Ronan did, he said to Solis. It wasn't, but it was the same family. He said family without warmth. He meant the category of decision, the decision to decide for another person what information they could handle. My family has been making that decision about me my whole life. I know, Solis said. I need to know one more thing. He looked at her directly. The evidence you built against Ronan, the material specifically pointing at his accounts, his decisions, his role in my father's death. Is it solid? It's solid. Solid enough to stand on its own without the material Marco provided. Yes, I built it to stand on its own. The problem is getting it separated from Marco's case before it gets used as foundation for the wrong prosecution. Cassian nodded once. Then that's what we do this morning. He looked at Alara. Get the box. I'll make a call. She looked at him. To who? Someone who outranks the attorney handling the case and who owes me a conversation. Not a favor, a conversation. He said it with the specific precision of a man who knows the difference and is not going to overstate what he has. I'll tell you everything he says. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she turned and walked toward the bank. The branch manager arrived at 8:53, a woman in her mid-40s who unlocked the door with the slightly harassed efficiency of someone who had exactly enough time to open correctly if nothing went wrong. She looked at Alara, waiting on the sidewalk, and nodded with the neutral acknowledgement of a service professional who did not find early arrivals unusual. Alara followed her in, gave the name Dana Marsh, showed the secondary ID she had kept in her truck's glove compartment for 8 years inside a hollowed-out first aid manual, the kind of precaution that looked like paranoia until the night it didn't. The manager pulled the file, verified the box number, and led her to the vault room without further conversation. The box was a standard size, the kind that held documents and small valuables. Alara had not opened it in 14 months. She opened it now. The contents were exactly as she'd described to Solis the night before. Financial records, printed on paper that was now slightly yellowed at the edges from years in a metal drawer. Transaction logs. Account structures. 2 photographs, physical prints, of men she recognized from the years she had spent adjacent to the Veil organization. Men whose names appeared in the documents beside dollar amounts and routing codes. And at the bottom of the box, a handwritten note in her own 24-year-old handwriting, the note she had written to herself when she filed everything away. If you're reading this, she had written, it went wrong. Make it right. She stared at that for a moment. The handwriting was hers, but the person who had written it felt like a different person, which was accurate. 24-year-old Alara had been operating on fear and instinct and the specific resourcefulness of someone with no safety net. 32-year-old Alara had more tools, different fears. A son asleep in a car a block away who had described his fear as the kind where you want to know how it ends. She took everything out of the box, put it in the document envelope the branch kept for precisely this purpose, signed the withdrawal form, walked out. The call Cassian made was to a man named Garrett Hoole, which Alara learned because Cassian put it on speaker in the car with everyone present, which was itself a statement. No more managed information, no more selective disclosure. Whatever came out of the phone, they all heard it. Garrett Hoole was the deputy director of a federal oversight division that she understood only in outline, but that Cassian apparently had a relationship with that predated the current investigation by several years. The call lasted 27 minutes. Hoole's voice was careful and institutional for the first half, and increasingly direct for the second half, as Cassian laid out, with the organized precision of someone who had been composing this case in his head while sitting in a car on a dark street. The specific argument that the current investigation had conflated two separate evidence streams and was pursuing the wrong primary target. He did not ask for the case to go away. He did not ask for immunity. He asked, specifically and only, for the evidence streams to be separated, for Solis's material to be assessed independently of Marco's, and for Ronan Vale to be the subject of an active warrant by end of business today. Hoole said, "That's a significant ask before 9 in the morning." "I know," Cassian said. "I have the original documents from the secondary source in my hands. I can have them to you within the hour. The source will speak to your people directly." He looked at Solis, a look that asked a question without words. Solis nodded. "The primary target ordered the death of his brother 9 years ago and has been running an organized criminal operation under a legitimate business cover using his nephew's name as the vehicle. The nephew is prepared to provide a full accounting of his own role in that operation in exchange for the investigation being correctly targeted." A silence on the line. "You're offering to cooperate," Hoole said. "I'm offering to be accurate," Cassian said. "What I did and what Ronan did are not the same thing. I want the record to reflect the difference." Another silence, longer. "Get me the documents," Hoole said. "I'll make some calls." 3 hours later, Ronan Vale was in federal custody. Alara learned this from Cassian's phone, which received a message from one of his people at 11:47 while they were sitting in a diner 2 blocks from the bank. The 4 of them, Cassian, Alara, Solis, and Milo, at a table by the window with coffee and the kind of breakfast food that exists to give the body something to do while the mind processes what just happened. Milo was eating pancakes with the focused attention he gave everything he was interested in. He had been told, in the car, an abbreviated version of the night. Not everything, but enough to account for the motel and the early morning and the bank and the waiting. He had processed it in the way he processed things, with 20 minutes of quiet and then a practical question. "Are we going home?" Cassian had said, "We're working on it." Milo had nodded and not pressed, which Alara noted and filed away as further evidence that her son was going to be either a very effective adult or a very good poker player. When the message came through, Cassian set the phone face down on the table, then turned it back over and read it again, then set it face down again. Then he looked out the window at the Healdsburg street where the morning was going on ordinarily. People walking, a delivery being made, a woman with a stroller navigating around a parking meter. "He's in custody," he said. Solis put down her coffee cup. Milo looked up from his pancakes. "Who is?" "Someone who is causing problems," Alara said. "The uncle?" Milo asked. Everyone at the table looked at him. He met the looks with the equanimity of a child who has gotten used to being the smartest person in the room and finds it more tiring than impressive. "You said complicated people," he said to Alara. "And then he said uncle last night on the phone when you didn't know I was listening." He addressed this last part to Cassian without apology. "I wasn't trying to listen. The bathroom wall is thin." Cassian looked at him for a moment. Something in his face moved. Not quite a smile, but in the same neighborhood. "Yeah," he said. "The uncle." Milo returned to his pancakes. "Good," he said, with the complete moral certainty of a 7-year-old, and said nothing more about it. They stayed in Healdsburg until early afternoon. Solis left first to meet with Hoole's people, carrying the original documents in the envelope Alara had brought from the bank. She said goodbye to Alara with the handshake of someone who understood that the accounting between them wasn't finished, but was at least begun. She said goodbye to Cassian with something that didn't fit inside a handshake. She put her hand briefly on his arm, and he let her, which cost them both something that wasn't visible from the outside. At the door of the diner, Solis stopped and looked back at Milo, who was drawing something on a napkin. "He's going to be fine," she said. To no one in particular. To the table. To the general air. I know, Cassian said. She left. Marco Del Vecchio's situation resolved itself by the following morning in a way that Alara learned about secondhand and at some remove, which was intentional. Cassian had made it clear that the operational details of what happened to Marco were not going to be a conversation he had in front of her or anywhere near Milo, and she respected that boundary even as she noted its existence. What she knew was that the federal separation of evidence streams removed Marco's leverage entirely. Without the Veil organization as a prosecutorial target, his cooperation agreement with the attorney's office collapsed, and without that agreement, Marco faced his own exposure in ways that Ronan's removal had made considerably more immediate. She didn't ask for more than that. Some accountings happened in rooms she wasn't in, and she had made a decision years ago about which rooms she was willing to enter. 3 days after the Harvest Festival, Alara went back to the Vineyard. She went alone in the early morning before the staff arrived and walked the rows she had been walking for 8 years. The festival equipment had been taken down. The string lights were coiled on pallets near the barn. The lawn had the slightly trampled look of a space that had held more people than it was meant to hold and would recover in a week. She stood at the end of the main row, where the vines were oldest and most established, their trunks twisted by years into shapes that looked intentional, and she looked at what she had built here. It was real. That was the thing she needed to confirm by standing in it, that the 8 years were real, that the work was real, that the life she had made was not erased by the fact of one long night. The harvest would still happen. The Grenache would still be bottled. Carmen would still be at her desk in the morning, efficient and unbothered, asking the right practical questions. She had built something that could survive a single terrible weekend. That mattered. She walked back to the truck, and on the way she passed the fence post at the main gate where Ronan's photograph had been taken. She stopped and looked at the post for a moment. Then she kept walking. Cassian came to the Vineyard 4 days after the festival, in the late afternoon, in a car she didn't recognize, smaller than the SUV, ordinary, the kind that didn't announce itself. He parked in the lot, not the VIP space by the entrance. He walked to the barrel room and knocked on the open door instead of entering. She looked up from the workbench where she was reviewing the harvest logs. "You knocked," she said. "It's your property," he said. She set down the log. "Come in." He came in and looked around the barrel room the way people look at places they're seeing clearly for the first time, not the way he'd processed it during the chaos of the festival weekend, quick and tactical, but with actual attention. He looked at the rows of barrels, the aging charts on the wall, the handwritten notes she kept on a whiteboard near the door that were a mix of technical jargon and shorthand that only made sense to her. "This is what you built," he said. "Most of it. It's good work." He said it the way he'd said things during those 3 hours in a motel room and a car and a diner, not as a compliment arranged for effect, but as an observation that happened to be true. "I know," she said. "How's the other situation?" "Stable. The oversight division is moving correctly. Ronan's arraignment is next week." He moved to stand near the far wall, hands in the pockets of a jacket that was not a suit jacket, which was a small detail she noticed because she noticed things. "Marco is managing his own problems. He won't be a factor." "Your organization?" "I'm in conversation with a legitimate restructuring firm. It's going to take time." He said it without drama, without the weight of a man announcing a great sacrifice, just the tone of someone describing the next practical step. "Some of what I've built can be kept. Some of it can't. I'm working out which is which." She looked at him. "And Solis?" "She's been removed from any ongoing federal relationship. By choice? Hers. She's consulting now? Independent." A pause. "We're okay. Are you?" "We're working on okay." He met her eyes. "Same as most things right now." Milo appeared in the doorway behind him. She had known he would. She'd heard the specific pattern of his footsteps on the gravel, and stopped when he saw Cassian. He'd seen Cassian twice since the diner, brief and managed, the introductory level exposure of a cautious and appropriate parent. Each time he'd been a little more at ease and a little less at ease simultaneously, which was the correct response to a complicated situation. "Hi," Milo said. "Hey," Cassian said. "Did you get it?" Milo said. Cassian reached into his jacket pocket and produced the silver necklace. Intact, clasp repaired.
She could see the new jump ring catching the barrel room light. He held it out and Milo crossed the room and took it with both hands, examined it, turned it over. The clasp was broken, Milo said. I had it fixed. Milo looked up. How did you know it was broken? Because it came off when someone took it, Cassian said. Something that comes off that easily has a broken clasp. Milo absorbed this logic and found it sound. He put the necklace on, arms behind his neck, the practiced motion of a child who'd been managing a necklace since he was old enough to insist on wearing it, and settled it against his chest. Thanks, he said. With the complete and simple directness that was his most consistent quality. You're welcome, Cassian said. Milo looked between the two of them with the assessing look. Then he said to Alara, Carmen wants to know if you're coming to the afternoon tasting. Tell her yes. Give me 10 minutes. He left. The barrel room went back to its ordinary sounds, the low hum of the climate system, the distant sound of a vehicle on the access road. He's going to want to know, Cassian said. Eventually. More than he knows now. I know. When you're ready. When we're ready. She said it deliberately, the we, and watched him hear it. That's not the same timeline as tomorrow, or next week, or when it's convenient. It's when it's right for him. Yes. No pushback, no negotiation. And you, she said. What you said in the motel, about becoming something different. I meant it. I know you meant it then. I'm asking if you still mean it now that tonight isn't happening anymore, now that you've had 4 days to sit with it. He was quiet for a moment, in the way she had learned to read over the course of one very long night as genuine consideration rather than performance. The organization I've been running, he said. I've been running it like I had no choice, like it was a thing that happened to me, like... He stopped, started again. Like I was Ronan's instrument and didn't know it, and once I knew it, the only honest position was to keep operating it, because what else was I going to be? He looked at his hands, then at her. But that's not actually true. I had choices inside the system he built, and I made them. Some of them I can live with, some I can't. That accounting is mine, not Ronan's, not my father's, mine. She waited. I'm not the same thing I was a week ago, he said. I don't mean that as a... I'm not saying it to tell you what you want to hear. I'm saying it because it's the only true thing I know about myself right now, and I've spent enough time living inside untrue things that I don't have the tolerance for it anymore. The afternoon light was coming through the high windows of the barrel room, low and gold, catching the dust that moved in the air between the barrels. She looked at him in it, and she thought about who she had been at 24 and who she was now, and whether those two people had different judgments about Cassian Vale or the same one, and the answer was that they had the same one, just more evidence. The Vineyard does a winter pruning in December, she said. It takes most of a week, and it's the worst job on the property. Cold and wet and tedious, and you go home every night with your hands destroyed. He looked at her. Okay. Milo likes to help. He has no actual skill, but he has strong opinions about which branches should go, and he argues his case extensively. She paused. We could use another set of hands. Something happened in his expression that she chose not to name because naming it would make it into a thing that could be judged too early or held too high. December, he said. December, she said. He nodded. Not the nod of a man closing a deal. The nod of a man writing something down in a place he doesn't lose things. She picked up the harvest log. He moved toward the door. Cassian, she said. He stopped. The necklace. It was yours. From before. She'd known since the night she was 24, and he'd put it around her neck in a kitchen that smelled like rain. Why did Milo have it? He looked at her for a moment. Because you kept it, he said. And he found it somewhere and wanted it, and you said yes, I'm guessing. She said nothing, which was its own kind of yes. He looked at the necklace around his son's neck in his mind, or she thought he did. She couldn't see his mind, but she could read the quality of his silence, and this one was the kind that held a specific image. I'm glad you kept it, he said. He walked out into the late afternoon, across the gravel she'd had relayed 2 years ago because the original surface drained badly, past the barrel rack she'd commissioned from a carpenter in Sonoma, toward the ordinary parking lot of an ordinary agricultural property in Napa Valley. She watched him go through the high window, watched him stop at the car, one hand on the roof, looking out at the vine rows in the afternoon gold.
He stood there for about 30 seconds, which was long enough to see something and not long enough to have seen it all. Then he got in the car and drove out the way he'd come. She went back to the harvest log, made a note about the Grenache yield, made a note about the barrel rotation due in 3 weeks, made a note in the margin in handwriting that was very different from the note a 24-year-old had left herself in a safe deposit box, because the person writing it was different and knew more and had different fears. The note said, December, just that. One word in the margin of a harvest log in a barrel room that smelled like oak and fermentation and the specific mineral quality of Napa Valley soil after a dry summer. She capped the pen and went to the afternoon tasting, walking through the rows she knew better than anything she'd ever known. And the vines were exactly as she'd left them, and the afternoon was exactly as unremarkable as it should have been, and Milo was at the end of the row arguing a logistical point with Carmen, and the silver necklace caught the light when he turned his head. The harvest would be good this year. She had known it for months. You learned to read the signs if you paid enough attention over enough seasons. And standing in it now, with everything that had come and gone in the space of one long weekend, she was certain of it the way she was certain of very few things. What you built with your hands, with your years, with your 5:15 mornings, and your tedious, careful attention, it stayed built. That was the deal the land offered. No one could take it from you without your participation. She had not participated. Everything else was December, and December was real, and real was enough. She found Milo at the end of the east road just before sunset, crouching over something in the dirt the way he always did. Nose close to the ground, completely absorbed, the rest of the world dissolved. "What is it?" she said. "A beetle." He didn't look up. "It's been here for like 20 minutes. I think it's lost." She crouched beside him. The beetle was moving in a slow, deliberate circle, which was either purposeful or deeply confused, and she had no way to know which. Neither did Milo, but he was committed to observing it until the answer revealed itself. "Carmen said the tasting went well," he said. "It did. She said one of the guests cried when they tried the Grenache. People do that sometimes." He considered this. Because it was that good? Because something about it reminded them of something, she said. "That's usually why." Milo looked at the beetle. "Like how the smell of the barrel room smells like home." She looked at him. "Yeah, like that." He stood up, satisfied that he had observed the beetle long enough to meet his own standard of due diligence. He brushed the dirt from his knees with the brisk efficiency of a person with places to be. The necklace moved when he did, catching the last of the low sun. She straightened beside him, and they stood at the end of the east row and looked at the vineyard in the late light. The long shadows the vines threw across the ground, the specific color. The sky went over the western ridge in October, the way the whole property settled into itself at the end of a day, the way a person settles into a chair they've been sitting in long enough that it fits them. "Mom," Milo said. "Yeah." "Cashin." He said the name like he was testing the weight of it. "He's coming back." Not a question, an assessment. She had learned to answer his assessments honestly because he always knew the difference. "In December," she said, "to help with pruning." Milo nodded slowly. Processing. Then, "Is he going to be around, like, more than December?" She thought about how to answer that in a way that was true without being more than she could stand behind tonight, tomorrow, in a week. She thought about what it meant to make a promise to a 7-year-old, which was that you did not make one unless you could keep it. "I think so," she said. "We're working on it." Milo picked up a small stone from the ground, turned it over in his fingers, and set it back down precisely where he'd found it. The small self-contained ritual of a child who noticed where things belonged. "Okay," he said. "That's okay with me." She put her arm around his shoulders, and he leaned into her the way he'd been leaning into her since he was small enough to carry. The specific angle of his weight against her side that she knew better than any measurement. They stood there while the light went the rest of the way down, and the vineyard became its evening version of itself, darker and quieter, and full of the sounds that only came when the day stopped competing with them. She thought about what she would tell him when the time came. Not tonight, not in one conversation. It wasn't one conversation, it was 100 small ones over years, each one adding a layer that the one before had made possible. She would tell him what was true and leave out what would only confuse him and let the rest emerge at the pace that life permitted, which was slower than anyone wanted and faster than anyone was ready for. She thought about Cassian at the car with his hand on the roof, looking at the rows. She thought about December. The beetle had moved on by the time they walked back through the rows to the house, following whatever logic beetles follow, finding its own way in the failing light. The kitchen was warm when they went inside. She made dinner, something simple, the kind of meal that asked nothing of either of them. Milo sat at the table and read a book with his elbow on the cover in the way she'd told him 100 times would ruin his posture, and she let it go tonight, because some corrections could wait, and some evenings were for letting things be what they were. Outside, the vineyard held the dark the way it always did, quietly, without complaint, with the patience of something that had learned to wait out the seasons and understood, in whatever way a cultivated thing can understand anything, that what came back in the spring was worth what the winter cost.